All right. Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us for this amazing panel titled The State of Crypto Privacy. All right, why don't we just kick it off with some panelist introductions? So please take a minute and provide a short overview of who you are, your background, and what you're working on. Paul, you were the first to join, so why don't you kick it off for us?
Okay, great. Hey, well, thanks for hosting this. Really happy to talk about privacy with this group and with all of the viewers. I'm Paul Brigner. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Alliances at Electric Coin Company. We're the developers of Zcash. Zcash is well known as being one of the top privacy coins, launched in 2016. We were the first to implement widespread availability of zero knowledge proof technology and kind of been the leader on that charge ever since. Really exciting time in the Zcash world. I hope to be able to talk about that some on this call. I'm in Washington, D.C. A lot of my work focuses on dealing with the policy and regulatory arena, which has been very interesting over the past, wow, forever now. But lots of changes certainly to talk about and new momentum to talk about there too. I also host a monthly meeting called PGP for Crypto that happens here in DC every month. I teach fintech at Georgetown University and just stay very busy working on privacy and promoting Zcash.
Awesome. Appreciate all your hard work, Paul. Oren, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey guys, I'm Auryn, founder of Gnosis Guild. We build a whole bunch of different infrastructure in the Web3 space, largely around access control primitives. But one of the projects that we are currently working on and really excited about is called Enclave, and it's a protocol for encrypted execution environments, essentially trying to give some functionally similar affordances to trusted execution environments, but built with cryptography and economics as opposed to hardware-based guarantees. Um, this is leveraging the combination of fully homomorphic encryption, zero-knowledge proofs, and multi-party computation to kind of enable these affordances. And yeah, can kind of dive deeper into this later, but I've just been a long time advocate for privacy-preserving technologies and generally kind of self-sovereignty. So excited to chat about that with the group.
Yep. Thanks, Arn. And just a little disclaimer that both Enclave, Gnosis Guild, as well as what Oliver will talk about, Panther, are part of the Deep Ventures family. So appreciate that. So Oliver, shoot.
Hey everyone. So I'm Oliver. I've been in Web3 since 2013. We set up the first Caribbean digital asset exchange and mobile money network. Everything I've done in the Web3 space has been focused on financial inclusion and enabling people's rights, whether it's their right to privacy, right to bear money, right to transact, and sort of over the last 11 years or so, I've been a co-founder of multiple ventures in the Web3 fintech space, and most recently, co-founder and CEO of Panther Ventures, which has built the Panther Protocol. And what Panther as a protocol does is it enables actors to create their own private execution environments for transfers, swaps, and execution of third-party smart contracts on EVM compatible chains. Our goal with Panther has been to enable regulatory compatibility whilst forcing it on no one. So zone managers essentially create their own zone, set up their own Web2 or Web3 or hybrid compliance systems, and then they can onboard their users and interact with DeFi with confidentiality.
All right. Yeah, thanks. We're all going to dig into the use cases and how your products work. Definitely want to dig into more as well as the tech that you all use in your products. But I want to start off with kind of some current events, right? So I've always said that most people don't care about privacy until they really have to care about privacy. And now they definitely have to because just 2 weeks ago, the largest data breach in history occurred. Like 16 billion login credentials and passwords were leaked. including those from major platforms such as Apple ID, Gmail, Facebook, and Telegram, which, of course, the crypto industry is basically built on. So, overall, like what went wrong? How can we avoid this in the future? And how could blockchain, kind of generally, blockchain privacy have helped here, if at all? Auryn, why don't you kick this one off?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the obvious obvious issue here is organizations choosing to or having to take custody of data in order to execute on their business strategy, right? And so I think that the biggest enabler for reducing this kind of data breach is reducing the need or desire for organizations to warehouse massive amounts of data. And obviously, there's a strong business incentive for organizations to do this. And so I think this is obviously the motivation behind protocols like what we're doing, what we're building with Enclave. But generally, I think is the motivation behind a whole class of different protocols and applications that are aiming to solve for this set of problems, right? Enable organizations to leverage data to produce insights from data, but not necessarily have to take custody of it or take custody of it for take custody of less data, take custody of data for less time, right? The kind of warehousing and siloing of just massive amounts of data creates these huge honeypots, and I don't think that you can solve for this set of problems without reducing the amount of data or the amount of time that data is exposed for.
Paul, Oliver, anything to add?
I agree with the sentiment that essentially the honeypot of centralized data being warehoused creates a single point of failure. And when you hold enough valuable information, motivated attackers will find ways ultimately to exploit that, even when the attacks are extremely expensive to execute. It's just a matter of time, really, under that model. And I think we've seen with the success of public-private key cryptography applied to finance and a range of other associated Web3 applications, gaming, identity, and so forth, that these type of systems work. They scale, they create their own network effects. And I mean, we're sitting at an inflection point where what was hypothesis for most of certainly the time that I've been in this industry is now coming to fruition with institutional and nation state adoption, and the biggest financial institutions in the world and government agencies getting on board with Bitcoin and with crypto to a lesser extent, but I expect that will continue to change. So, with that being precedent, I think the question and the challenge is, how do you bootstrap these type of solutions where users have custody of their own, whether it's a data enclave or their own identity, and how do they securely manage those? Now, things like key recovery and ensuring that non-sophisticated users have recourse in the event that they lose their private keys, those things are covered. They're pretty effective solutions available today. I think the real challenge is the one of motivation. The network effects of the largest organizations in the world that have these honeypots of data are tremendous, and their motivation to cripple themselves is pretty low, and it becomes a large political challenge. And also one of who's going to make the first move, because as large as these organizations are, and as the incumbent as they are, they also have large competitors that they have to keep their eyes on. So unless there was some sort of concurrent agreement to move away from these centralized database and data storage mechanisms, I can't see the incumbents doing it. And then really the challenge for the private sector is, and startups and protocol developers, is how do you create enough incentive for users to adopt your system without having all of the ancillary benefits that these more incumbent systems have? And tokenomics have been effective in bootstrapping to some extent, but I would say there's still a fairly large chasm between where these emerging products are as technologies, which is viable, and where they need to get to as adopted applications.
Paul, anything to wrap this one up?
Well, I kind of agree with all of that that has been shared. I would just say that, you know, just starting with the simple case of being able to transact with digital cash, I think is a really good start in helping to address this problem. It helps people understand what it's like to actually use a disintermediated service on the internet in a digital way. So my hope is that if it's not with Zcash, maybe it's even with some other crypto or even a stable coin where you don't necessarily have an intermediary that's collecting all of this data around every transaction you make, would allow us and allow people generally to understand the benefit of just not having all of that information shared. So I do expect that, especially as stable coins move forward here, it seems very obvious that that's happening fast, that people will experience digital cash in a way that they haven't before, and that will give them back control of some of that data because they don't necessarily have to use that credit card or use other services where everything is being traced and tracked.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of human nature that people are kind of inherently lazy, right? So a lot of like the incumbents that Oliver speak of, we all know who they are. They make things very easy for people to use their products and make those products very sticky and make those products free and essentially trading that data. That the data is the price that users have to pay instead of money. So yeah, definitely breaking that mindset is a long-term game. But Paul, why don't we continue with you in terms of talking to us about Zcash, telling us, Zcash is one of the OG privacy coins. Tell us about like who your target customer is, what the problem your product solves, and kind of the journey into how your product has evolved to what it is today.
Sure. Thank you. Well, so Zcash is a fork of Bitcoin, and really we share all of the values of Bitcoin. And I think even probably are closer to what maybe there was a Satoshi's vision based that's talked about in the white paper. I think that we are trying to be as reflective of that as we possibly can. The issue with Bitcoin, as far as being able to use it as digital cash, is this pseudonymity where if that address that you're using, and if you're not super savvy about how you do it, if you share that address, someone can see all of your transaction history. They can see how much Bitcoin you have. They can see way too much information, essentially. It's not the kind of private digital cash that I think is discussed in the white paper or that was hoped for. So we're trying to build that with zero knowledge proof technology. We're able to have a ledger that is essentially completely encrypted. Each entry in the ledger is stamped with a zero knowledge proof that ensures that only the amounts that you have been spent, that there's no double spending, and it just ensures that all the rules of the protocol, which are essentially very close to that of Bitcoin, are followed. So it just allows for digital cash, and that is really a very simple mission that we have. I will say, however, that Zcash is evolving over time. It's getting some really exciting lately with some of the new developments. There's a scaling initiative that's underway that will help us unlock just a whole new scale. Millions of transactions a second is kind of that level that we're shooting for. So that is, it looks like that's going to be possible, which is kind of a game changer. There's also shielded assets that are coming on top of Zcash. So you might be able to have a stable coin, for instance, on top of Zcash that would still benefit from all of that private transaction protection, but allow for a stablecoin issuer to still work with the chain. So there's more to discuss there too, but those are some of the top things that have me excited about taking this very simple idea of being able to transact privately and scaling it and then making it available to more use cases.
Great. Oliver, tell us a little bit about Panther and how the product has evolved. I think you're on mute.
Speaking of private
There you
digital
go.
cash, that was the original idea which captured my imagination when my co-founder and I set out on the journey of building Panther. And it was this like idea that we need a bearer instrument. We need something which is private. Cash plays a very important role in society, particularly for the unbanked and underbanked. I'm from the Caribbean. 60% of transactions are conducted in cash, and that's got nothing to do with money laundering. It has everything to do with a lack of adequate banking infrastructure, identity infrastructure, and just tools to enable commerce. And so, looking at the scale of that problem, we started designing Panther, and then there's a whole set of problems. So, first of all, there's the compliance issue, which is one of it's like this balance between disclosure and the right to privacy. The right to disclose what you want to do, the right to say what you want to say, or the right to say nothing. All of those are, in my view, expressions of freedom of speech. And so we set out to build a protocol and have built a protocol that, as I mentioned, enables actors to act as a gatekeeper, if you will, for a set of users that they onboard into the protocol, which essentially is an aggregate mixer, which is partitioned into each of these zones. And so what happens is the zone manager complies with their own criteria and standards. Maybe they're regulated or self-regulated. It really is their responsibility and their mandate. They onboard their users, and their users can then benefit from the network effect, the privacy set, if you will, of all of the users without mixing the funds and without crossing users and without disclosing users' identity and transaction history involuntarily. And so this addresses the problem of all of your transaction information being on chain. When you're conducting a transaction, probabilistically, it provides a level of privacy. And at the same time, it also is compatible with mainstream adoption with the average user who doesn't have an interest in knowing or understanding the complex cryptography which goes into the product and just wishes to use it. And so and is of course like transacting on chain. So Panther is straddling that careful divide, and the way that between compliance and privacy, and the way that we do it is by enabling flexible and modular deployments.
All right. All right, Auryn, what's going on in Enclave?
Yeah, so we are still kind of much earlier stage than both Zcash and Panther. I've been following along with Zcash since it was first announced, and I remember burning my laptop fans at full speed trying to contribute. Originally mining, it had this really fun, kind of like a Dutch auction for hash power to initialize, which was a cool mechanism. But yeah, so Enclave, we're still very early stage. We just spun up a kind of hack net so that developers can start playing with it. But the core idea is that we want to enable for a kind of class of computations that's dealing with aggregating information from many different sources. We want to enable arbitrary aggregations, arbitrary computations over sensitive information without having to reveal that information to whoever's doing the aggregation. So take many private inputs, arbitrarily compute, produce a verifiable output. It stacks a handful of novel cryptographic schemes on top of each other. So there's some pretty high compute overhead, but we think that there is a class of applications that this kind of premium for privacy makes sense today. And then there's a significant amount of research and development that's gone into and continuing to go into improving both encryption scheme speed in the case of FHE and ZK, and then also hardware acceleration for both. So we'll see I think the gap between plain text compute and encrypted compute close pretty significantly over the next months and years. The types of use cases that we're looking to target initially are things are relatively simple computations where you get this really where it justifies the privacy premium. And so in particular, we're looking at things where the integrity guarantees of the system really lean heavily on it having strong guarantees around information asymmetries or the lack thereof. So think about things like private voting systems, sealed bid auctions, where if you can have access to the inputs, then you can manipulate the outcome of the system via bribery, collusion, coercion. And so, yeah, these are the first kind of beachhead use cases that we're looking at. But then beyond that, really excited about things like collaborative data analytics, collaborative research, potentially collaborative tuning, training, inference, and yeah, a whole bunch of other use cases here, just generally where you're looking to aggregate information. And so obviously this is the tie-in to the opening question around how do you avoid these kind of honeypots where you have massive amounts of data that's aggregated with one party, that's stored with one party. And I think our argument to this, our solution to this would be to say, stop aggregating the data itself and produce the insight that you want from data that's warehoused by the people or the entity that it's relevant to. And again, obviously there's some business cases where there's some pretty strong convincing that needs to happen to have people either start to refuse to relinquish the data in the first place or stop trying to warehouse it. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done there on the convincing on both sides there, making a compelling business case on both sides. I think things like this data leak are a huge indicator in terms of the liability that you take on as a business by warehousing data. And then I think from the end user point of view, I think there's a conversation to be had around the leverage that you gain by not relinquishing data and being able to participate more directly in these systems that generate value from aggregations. And I think this is one of the threads that we really want to push on more is by maintaining sovereignty over your data, where our hope is that things like Enclave can be essentially a disintermediating factor, disintermediating force for interacting with these systems that generate value through aggregating massive amounts of data. Right? We see the internet as a disintermediating force for the aggregation of information, for access to information. We see blockchain as this disintermediating force for access to financial primitives, financial tooling, and we see the class of technologies that we're building as a disintermediating force for access to the value that's created from aggregating information. Yeah, sorry, a bit of a long-winded response there.
No worries, appreciate that insight. Yeah, you've already built a kind of private voting application for DAOs, right?
Yeah, so we have this is our kind of demo case that we have a version up and running. People can play with that at crisp.enclave.gg. It's a toy application, but it does demonstrate the practical side of things of being able to actually run, do your FHE encryption client side, being able to generate some client side proofs that do the input validation, and then hand off that payload to a relayer to publish. And then every day the results of these little fun tallies get processed. The FHE computation gets processed in a verifiable way and then published. So yeah, it's a good toy application. And then as we ramp into our series of test nets over the next few months, then we'll start to make this a more kind of production ready application that integrates into some of the more familiar voting tools that people already play with.
Nice. Yeah. So if anyone runs a DAO, yeah, maybe they can kind of check it out and see what that looks like. So we've thrown around some technical terms, ZK proofs being one of them, and all of your products have implemented ZK proofs in one form or another. So who has a nice, simple, packaged explanation of what ZK proofs are, and why was this kind of tech the best choice for your product? So Paul, you mentioned that Zcash is one of the very first to leverage ZK proofs. do you have a nice simple without getting too too deep into the weeds of how ZK proofs work and yeah, why this is such an amazing technology?
The basic proposition is being able to prove something that without having to reveal the underlying details that support that proof. And I think of it very simply as if I'm thinking of this ledger, that there's just a stamp or a proof assigned to each entry. And if someone wants to validate that that ledger follows all the rules of the protocol, they don't have to go through and look at each of the data fields. First of all, they're encrypted, so they couldn't. But what they can do is they can look at this proof and they can, through uh, mathematics that are above me, and maybe some of these others could describe them, but beyond my understanding, but they're able to mathematically prove that all of the protocol rules were followed, and it's really that simple. I just think of it as an envelope that is never opened with a stamp on it, and as long as you can look at that stamp and do the calculation on that stamp, then you know that you're following the right rules.
So in the sense of Zcash, it's essentially saying that the person A paid person B without disclosing who
You
those
don't
two are, what the amount were, or anything like that, right?
Right. None of the details of that transaction are shared, not the sender, receiver, the amount, none of it. It's just an entry with a cryptographic proof assigned.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I think the critical part there for Zcash is as a recipient, right? Like, so as a recipient of some transaction, you can follow the chain of proofs well, actually, really only the one proof that you need, but I guess ultimately, yeah, you can follow the chain of proofs back all the way to Genesis to essentially validate that this claim that someone's making to be able to send me X amount of Zcash is valid.
Right.
And as this chain of proofs, I don't need to see the balancers or the senders that any of the previous transactions had. I can verify with this succinct proof that what they're claiming to, the balance that they're claiming to be able to send to me is legitimate. Which is a really powerful statement. And then obviously with ZK, something that can be generalized to much more complex circuits as well.
Yep. So
Um,
Oliver, what's ZK's role in kind of the overall Panther system, and where does it add value there?
Yeah, so we use Groth 16 um, for our ZK proofs, and we have something called a Z account, which essentially is your account by any other name. There's a ledger within Panther, and it has all of your transaction history, the transactions that have taken place, and your current asset balances of various assets that you're holding. Maybe it's ZETH, stable coins, etc. Um, and those balances are tied to your Z account. And so there's first of all the compliance onboarding flow. So I mentioned Panther can have sort of any sort of arbitrary compliance framework in place. What was built for the version 1 mainnet is a ZK AML system. So what the user will do is they will submit their compliance documentation to the zone manager. So in our case, it's a European VASP that we've onboarded called Eurobit. They're a Spanish licensed entity. And so they're responsible for the zone. The user submits their information. It is processed by a KYC processor who will validate the criteria that the zone manager, the VASP, essentially lays out, which in turn are aligned to the regulatory requirements in Spain and the European Union in this case. So all of those checks are done. The user is approved in that sense, and they're issued then a zero knowledge credential. And anytime they want to access Panther Protocol, thereafter, they will submit their zero knowledge credential. That will be verified on chain, and they will be able to access their account, their transaction history, transfer those assets, and so forth. So it's a proof that they are the account owner and that they have the right to transact. And so that acts as sort of a zero knowledge digital identity framework. In theory, you could take that credential and partner with another application or protocol, and that entity may say, okay, well, a European VASP onboarded and verified you. That satisfies our criteria. We don't need to know exactly who this counterparty is because we have a different standard or a different use case. So we'll accept a zero knowledge proof, and in turn, they can verify it. And so what you end up having is a situation where you are sort of riding on the back of the credential and the underwriting work on the identity that was done at the outset without having to share your personal information with each actor. So today, if you want to go from financial service A to B in a Web2 framework, you need to submit your, let's say, passport picture to every one of those entities. Each of them are holding those in their databases. And so if any one of them is compromised, then you are compromised. And so this goes back to the opening remarks around creating honeypots. It's not just creating a honeypot, it's creating a honeypot n number of times, replicating the data that is personal and private across all of these service providers. And it's a huge cost. I think in the US alone, the compliance cybersecurity costs is something like $500 billion a year in threat management software. So implementing these type of zero knowledge systems has a massive economic use case when applied.
Yep, 100%. Auryn, take it away in terms of the role ZK plays, but also you mentioned fully FHE, fully homomorphic encryption. Talk a little bit about how that works in Enclave. I know you can get really deep into this stuff, but try to keep it a little high level.
Yeah, no worries. Yes, I mean we've obviously been the benefactor of a bunch of the work that the Zcash team has done over the years, pushing forward ZKP technology. We've leveraged Halo 2 pretty extensively early on. We did recently migrate some of our proofs from Halo 2 over to Noir, and are currently using Bratenberg, or compiling that down to Bratenberg. But the rationale there with that migration was really just to give us a bit more future flexibility, allow us to write circuits in a relatively high-level language, and then benefit from whatever the latest proving backends are. But yeah, to give a bit more of a concrete example of how we're using it, we essentially use zero-knowledge proofs to make Enclave as a protocol end-to-end verifiable. So each phase in Enclave as a execution environment carries one or several proofs along with it to make it verifiable, but also to make it permissionless in stages. Right? There's steps like, say, for example, the sortition process when a set of node operators are selected. This currently is a permission process where we say we're going to run this algorithm, select some nodes, and then publish the set of nodes that are selected. But there'll be a proof that this will be run in production as a verifiable process. So anyone can run the sortition algorithm, generate the proof, and then publish the list of nodes that were selected for a given committee. And kind of similarly for each stage in Enclave as a protocol. So things like key generation, key aggregation, input validation, decryption share, generation and aggregation, and all this good stuff. A critical component where we use it is input validation. So when a party wants to provide an input to a computation, they're obviously supplying a big blob of ciphertext, which is necessarily opaque to everyone else. And I mentioned earlier, there's a significant compute overhead for fully homomorphic encryption. One of the ways that we can reduce that compute overhead is to push as much of the logic to the edges as possible. So have, rather than doing input validation logic as part of our FHE program, push it to the edges and require the user to supply a proof that the inputs that they're providing to a given execution environment are valid for that program. And so this is things like proving that their ciphertext is a valid encryption to the public key for that encryption environment, execution environment, proving that they know the pre-image to the ciphertext, proving that their pre-image is well formed for the given computation, that they're a registered data provider for that computation, and kind of any other arbitrary logic that the application developer wants to add on top of it. And so, yeah, this is a really critical point that we use ZKPs. We also use it to verify the execution of the core FHE logic. So we're running the core FHE logic in a verifiable environment. This is things like RISC-0, ZKVM, Jolt, SP1, the handful of these different ZKVMs that we've been playing with as a environment to run the core FHE logic in. So yeah, we're using ZKPs pretty heavily throughout the project and throughout the protocol to verify every phase, every stage of a execution environment. And then, yeah, to catch folks up on fully homomorphic encryption, it's this relatively newer field of encryption, a newer class of encryption schemes that's starting to hit maturity now. And essentially what it lets you do is take some data, encrypt it, run a computation on the encrypted data that will then produce another ciphertext. When you decrypt that ciphertext, it'll give you the same output as if you had to run the analogous computation on the plain text input. So it allows you to do arbitrary compute over encrypted data, which is a really powerful, mind-blowing primitive. And then, when coupled with ZKPs, gives you some very neat affordances. And then when further coupled with MPCs to distribute decryption keys, allows us to create these really interesting systems. And so maybe a succinct description here of how we're using these three different cryptographic primitives. ZKPs to make the process end-to-end verifiable, FHE to allow us to encrypt over, to compute over encrypted data, and then MPC to allow us to distribute encryption keys and the responsibilities around managing secrets.
Nice, a lot going on. Yeah, I mean, FHE is just it's just mind-blowing how you can actually do analysis on this data without having to decrypt it. So I know there's a ton of research still going on that, still relatively new. But yeah, that's getting that to be efficient and work at scale is going to be absolutely transformational. I want to jump in to the elephant in the room, is the regulatory environment around crypto privacy. And there's always been tension between regulators and crypto privacy. There's the Bank Secrecy Act, MiCA, and the EU. Many governments taking very strong stances against privacy coins because of fear of money laundering. And this has led to the delisting of privacy coins like Zcash by centralized exchanges. The co-founders of Tornado Cash have been detained. Roman Storm's trial is coming up in about 2 weeks there. So there's clearly hostility against the crypto privacy space. So how do you operate in this hostile regulatory environment? How has your approach changed in light of these developments? Oliver, I want to start with you because we worked together at Panther when the Tornado Cash situation originally hit. So tell us the story about how you shifted gears and how that changed the product and the progress over time.
Yeah. Well, it was a very expensive shift to start there. So when we began developing Panther in 2020, DeFi was emergent, and it was like this new phenomenon now taking off, and regulators had no idea how to address it. So there was a prevailing paradigm and belief that if you had a decentralized system, then you're not responsible for what happens within that system. And this pretense was advised by, probably every law firm that services the crypto industry for a number of years. And as with any legal opinion, it sort of comes with a caveat, which is like, we don't write the laws, there are no laws, so you shouldn't really rely on this to some extent, which is a difficult situation for any builder. And so kind of fast forward into 2000, I guess it was 2023, when the Tornado Cash arrest had happened. And, we had already recognized that the likelihood of being able to build a decentralized system, do a token raise, and have no responsibility whatsoever was low. And we also decided early on that we weren't going to fully decentralize the smart contracts initially because there are security risks attached to that. So Panther had built what we were calling ZK reveals, which is this mechanism whereby the user can voluntarily disclose their information, which I would say probably takes inspiration from Zcash and the ability to do sort of public transactions if a user wants. And seeing how centralized exchanges accepted Zcash on the premise that those deposits were done through the public addresses as opposed to the private ones. And so that looked like an elegant solution. And then I think this is a combination of Operation Choke Point 2.0 and just the political climate in the US, and then like a general crackdown by the SEC and US regulators against Web3 and particularly privacy, which sort of culminated in the Tornado Cash arrests. We went back to the drawing board and looked at the system and said, the question was, is a voluntary disclosure going to be enough? And the answer from our perspective was not if you're trying to manage risk effectively. And so this is where the concept of a zone manager was birthed. And, in effect, I think what we've done is engineer a better system because it's now compatible with any financial service provider in any jurisdiction and regime. And there is no trade-off for the users or the network effects. Like Panther is not spinning up independent instances and asking zone managers to bootstrap their network effects from zero. Each participant can use the privacy set of the other. What is being done is that zone manager is taking responsibility for their users. And so, there is this DAO. Recently, this year, in the last few months, Panther Ventures Limited, which is our development company, granted the intellectual property to a Swiss foundation. That foundation is open source, all of the Panther code and documentation. And there's been a community-led mainnet beta, which has run in tandem with a European VASP. And, that really is those events are the symbolic handing over from us as developers and the fundraising entity and the original thinkers behind Panther to now it being something which is foundation DAO / community led. And really, from our perspective, the tooling is there. Like if you want to do something fully compliant, the tools are there to do so. If you are a freedom hardcore advocate and you can convince the foundation or the DAO by way of a voting mechanic to run a zone with no compliance, I mean, that is also in theory possible. And it sort of like distills down to what every lawmaker wants, which is a responsible party. And I think that our societies are better for there being responsible actors. And perhaps something like Zcash or Monero have a stronger claim to decentralization than I think a DeFi protocol with a development team or core team that is building it. And I think even then, Ethereum is not even out the woods as a fully decentralized protocol. In the US, I expect it will be, but just because Ethereum is, it doesn't mean that Solana will be, and so forth. So this question of who's responsible and in what capacity is very detailed. It's extremely difficult to engineer and execute on something where no one is responsible. And if you're going to build a privacy system, then you kind of have to decide, are you trying to service the edge cases of extreme privacy, or are you trying to service something that's going to make everyone's life better? And if the choice is the latter, then it's not a question of compliance or no compliance. It's a question of what is an appropriate compliance system that moves our society forward. And so, that's the path that Panther has walked, if you will.
Yeah, it's a tough balance. It's a really, really tough time to walk. Paul, how has Zcash responded to these centralized exchange delistings and kind of other kind of the outfall of these regulatory developments against privacy?
Yeah, well, being here in DC and focusing on the whole policy and regulatory arena for most of my career, it's really been fascinating to work in crypto for the last, I don't know, number of years, since around 2017, seeing that we were in this period of just attack and being really singled out as an industry by the SEC for uh, you know, possibility of it being a security and all of these investigations that came forward. That it was remarkable how difficult it was to run a privacy project during that time. Um, it was such that, I don't think that our team felt very comfortable raising their head up too much. And we basically had to just, we didn't make any compromises on our tools or what we were doing, but we certainly weren't trying to have a high profile or trying to push the project as much as I think we would have liked to have, especially, when Tornado Cash and those types of sanctions came along. So now I think that we're in a completely different environment, and I do believe that, I see opportunities for us to push very, very hard now. So it is my hope that, we take advantage of this time where the pendulum has just swung to the entire, opposite side, and we're able to build without too much concern. However, it's not completely um, clear. And that's something that I've been focusing on quite a bit. I mentioned earlier that I host this monthly meeting in Washington, D.C., where we talk about these issues often. And just this last meeting in June, we had Peter Van Valkenburg from Coin Center talking about the issue of Tornado Cash and Samurai Wallet and how those prosecutions are still ongoing. And the remarkable irony there, just how the uh, the the smart contracts have been taken off of the sanctions list, the OFAC list, and but yet the individuals are still being pursued under other charges, essentially for lack of registering as a money transmitter. But at the same time, the it's essentially being admitted in the way that they're bringing these cases that there was no place for them to register. So the irony of this is just incredible that and it's still going on. If you wanted to see a really deep dive into that, I encourage you to look at the YouTube channel of PGP for crypto. If you just do YouTube/at PGP for crypto, you can see the latest videos there. One of them is that one I just mentioned with Peter Van Valkenburg and Amanda Tuminelli. She's with the DeFi Education Fund, and he's with Coin Center, of course. So yeah, I mean it's an incredible shift. My hope is that as we continue to talk about how things aren't quite fixed yet in this policy and regulatory arena, that will be addressed along with everything else that has been. Overall, though, I think that I feel much better about the industry being able to drive forward and move forward with privacy. So yeah, that's just a high level view of my feelings about the situation at this time.
Yeah, I want to dig into that with some time we have left. But Auryn, like you're building a privacy preserving platform that other builders can build upon, less focused on kind of the private transactions. How have you been monitoring the regulatory situation, and yeah, how has that impacted you and as kind of a development platform?
Yeah, I think we have been, again, fortunate to inherit a lot of the work that folks like the Zcash ecosystem have done and Coin Center have done in just advocating for privacy technology, and the kind of legal clarity around it. We are not directly building a financial platform, and so I think sidestep a lot of the concerns there that typically come along with any kind of financial primitive. Obviously, it's a protocol that people may be able to build financial primitives on top of, and so I think there's probably some regulatory questions that come up at some point in future. But our approach is really to build the system in such a way that it is legitimately decentralized. I know Oliver mentioned there being some questions around who's ultimately responsible in these kind of systems, and this not being a kind of foolproof strategy. But yeah, ultimately this is a decentralized protocol that anyone should be able to build just about anything on. And our stance here is that the responsibility in those cases is the person building an application on top of it, as opposed to the protocol itself. But again, we're early on in the journey, and I think there's a lot of time for opinions here to evolve and change as we get closer to production and start seeing kind of real world usage and what types of applications people want to build on top of it. Our hope here is that from the data point of view, we can help to enable organizations to have less regulatory hoops that they have to jump through in order to gain insights from data, right? The fact that they will not have to take custody of data in order to produce an insight out of it, I think will reduce a bunch of the liability that they would otherwise have to take on in order to produce insight. How that translates in different jurisdictions, though, I think is still a wide open question.
Yeah. So do you think, how do you see privacy's role kind of in the broader crypto ecosystem over the next few years? Do you see regulatory playing a massive role in that, or do you see kind of the tools still continuing to be built while those regulatory actions are being monitored? How do you see we're obviously on this panel with true believers, right? But like, kind of objectively, how do you see this all shaking out over the next few years? Jump in, anyone who's got the
I mean, like you said, pretty biased. Very much a true believer in cypherpunk values and privacy as a core value. But it does seem like there is some more regulatory understanding than has previously been the case, and some clarity that's come through over the last year, and how at least some jurisdictions are going to deal with it. And so hopefully that trend continues. Hopefully we continue to get more regulatory clarity and sensible regulatory clarity that kind of is born of a fundamental understanding of the way that these types of systems work, along with the affordances that they actually create, and the mitigations that can be built into them. I'm hopeful for a future where things like KYC become less prevalent. I think there's some pretty strong arguments towards them being much more damaging than they are protective, and so hopefully we get some over the next years and decades some I don't know, pullback of some of the regulatory requirements around that kind of thing, because I think they've not been helpful. I'm not super hopeful that will happen, but this would be a really nice outcome.
Oliver, what do you have something to say about that KYC requirements?
I mean, I think personally, I've been building financial systems and compliance backends for 11 years now, and the tools available and the onboarding friction is significantly reduced today compared to what it was in 2013 and 14. So, um, there's two sides to it. From a user experience perspective, we're definitely moving in the right direction. And I think that it will continue to be easier to onboard to an array of financial service providers or service providers that require your personally identifying information. And that's great. On the other side of that equation, there's more data housed on each of us today than there has been at any point in history, and that exposes each of us and collectively exposes us to risks. So we need to have an improvement of the back-end systems and how data is managed and stored and accessed and shared. All of those things are interlinked. I don't think AML compliance is going anywhere. I agree. I think it's very damaging. The costs, there are many studies that show that the costs of enforcing AML compliance far exceed the benefits to society because essentially the KYC bar is raised so high now as to be onerous. So redressing that balance is something that will happen as a byproduct of improved negotiating position of the citizen. And things like decentralized financial systems improve the collective negotiating position. Sort of, Bitcoin is only where it is today because it was very difficult, if not impossible, to shut it down at inception. It wasn't that it snuck up on the powers that be. They just couldn't do anything about it. And I think that it improves society. So that's a good thing. And that's common, PGP encryption went through the same sort of struggle. It was like oppressed, and then it was found that actually this improves our experience on the internet and payments, and so I think we're mid-stride on that journey with decentralized and encrypted private systems. Like in terms of the next few years, it's been great to see the US Republican Party come forward and say that the right to bear crypto assets in a self-hosted wallet is as fundamental to American values as anything else, because that was really under assault under the previous political and regulatory regime, and that itself is an attack on base freedoms, right? And so that's great to see, and I think that opens up removal of sanctions from smart contracts was another like fundamental assault on the concept of like in the US they call them your constitutional rights, and I'd say so removing that kind of says, well, okay, first of all, you can bear your own assets in a wallet. You can have cash in your wallet, and you don't need a license for that. You can have digital assets in your wallet, and you don't need a license for that. You don't need to report to anyone on that. We're still in the free world, and simultaneously saying, hey, a smart contract that doesn't have anyone that controls it is not a legal entity, and therefore it cannot be sanctioned. And so that creates some separation. Where the waters get murky, and I think that this is going to be a losing battle, is with DAOs. DAOs are going to fall under increasing scrutiny. I think the body of legal cases attacking every DAO member, every token holder, these sort of settlement and cases that are making their way through courts of appeal and so forth will ultimately make their way to the Supreme Court in the US, and we'll find something akin to, just because you buy a token does not make you liable and responsible for what that DAO does. But that doesn't mean that there aren't responsible parties at DAOs. So those waters need to be clarified. And I'd say finally, on this subject, my view has always been that if you provide an interface to interface with smart contracts, and those smart contracts are decentralized, then you are the responsible party. And if you are enabling or facilitating financial services, then you would be well advised to consult your local legal advisors and figure out what you need to do. So if you host an interface, whether it's a set of APIs or a front end, and you allow people to access financial services, that is not the same thing as self-custodying and self-accessing those smart contracts. you better find yourself a regulator is sort of my view. And I'm pretty happy with that outcome because it doesn't preclude the individual from spinning up their own open source wallet and interfacing with Uniswap and conducting swaps and not enabling or facilitating anyone else's transactions. And I think that that is like cool. That's what we wanted. Certainly, that's what I wanted. Like I'm not an anarchist. I would say I adhere to the cypherpunk manifesto as well. But I don't think it's a crypto anarchist manifesto. So those are my views.
All right. Paul, want to wrap it up?
Sure. Well, I would just say there was a lot of optimism there. So thanks for that, Oliver. From my perspective, this is not quite there yet because we don't have a lot of these protections that you mentioned about self-custody and ability to develop software without the possibility of being held as a money transmitter. Those things are still not in law. And that's what's moving right now. It's possible that that will happen this year. I certainly hope it does. A lot of that's in the Clarity Act that's moving through Congress. But as you all know, Congress is kind of like focused on another issue right now, working on big beautiful bills and other things like that. So yeah, I mean, I do think there's a lot of room for hope, but until we see that in law, I'm not going to be too comfortable because even though the Tornado Cash smart contracts were taken off the OFAC list, the way they were taken off is very nuanced, and it left room for FinCEN to come back and do it again, perhaps. And we might have a whole another situation where that would happen if it doesn't get clarified in law that software is protected. Likewise, with self-custody. So, I really think that my hope is that eventually that we're going to focus on the underlying issue of, as others mentioned here, KYC and AML, that whole regime, and the law in the U.S. that drives a lot of that is the Bank Secrecy Act. There has been some talk of that being looked at and adjusted. I mean, it's a constant thing that where that's reevaluated. But with this new administration, I do think they're taking a harder look. We and everyone here, we're out there talking about zero knowledge proofs. We're talking about new ways to do this that don't require honeypots. I do believe, I'm very optimistic that the tech is going to be used eventually to help us eliminate a lot of this redundancy of honeypots out there. And hopefully, we would just create a whole new regime. What I would love to see is that more people just use these tools. And I think that that's really the drive of our community right now in Zcash is making things much more usable than they have been in the past with an app on your phone, with the Zashi app, Zashi. You can send and receive and even buy Zcash very easily. A lot of people don't know. I just tweeted about it the other day, is that we have an integration through Coinbase directly into our self-custody wallet where you can buy up to $500 a week without KYC, without a Coinbase account that goes directly into your self-custody wallet. So there is a threshold there where that's possible. And that's pretty important. That actually eliminates a lot of the tracking and data collection that we're talking about here that is so much of a concern. So I would encourage people to just take advantage of this. If we all adopt these technologies, if we start using these solutions, policymakers are going to take note and they're not going to be able to take them away. So let's adopt them fast.
Yeah, it's gotta be from the bottom up, right? Awesome, guys. Hey, I know we went over. Thank you so much for your time. There was so much to talk about here. Just to wrap it up, tell us a little bit more about how the people in the audience can learn more about your project. Auryn, where can they learn about Enclave?
Yeah, you can find us on Twitter at enclave3. The website is enclave.gg. Otherwise, come jump into the Gnosis Guild Discord server.
Oliver?
You can find us on X at ZK Panther and on the web at panther.org or pantherprotocol.io.
Right, mainnet coming pretty soon, right?
Yeah, mainnet beat has been done, so yeah, it's like on the horizon now.
Awesome, awesome. Paul?
Yeah. So again, I'm with Electric Coin Company. That's electriccoin.co. Tons of resources out there for Zcash. There's a new one that I think is pretty cool that just came out. I just saw it the other day, sci-fi.money. So it's got a lot of good resources, but there's Z.Cash and many other things. And of course, that Zashi app that I mentioned. Please, if anyone's really interested, reach out to me, LinkedIn or X. Love to talk to you about it and help you onboard in a meaningful way.
Amazing. I think this is just one of the most important and interesting spaces in crypto and overall in tech. So thank you guys so much for joining us in this panel, for your work in building for a freer world. And thanks so much for everyone attending this webinar. And we will see you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye
Thanks,
bye.
bye.